Hello and welcome to episode 117 of Decentralized Revolution. I'm Aaron Harris. I have hosted a lot of these episodes since way back when it was just me. We've had our guest tonight on a couple times before. We're going to introduce him in a second. But I really enjoyed lately having Michael Heise and Brandi Bishop in. First, Brandi, how are you doing today?
I'm good.
You doing good? Okay,
Yeah.
yeah. I always envy your setup. You it looks so much nicer than everybody else's. But
It's a stream
Mike,
setup.
yeah, Mike, how are you today?
I'm doing good, man. Loving life. Baby is holding his head up. He's 1 month old, wearing clothes for 3 months old.
Okay.
Um, and with this new job, I work for a Bitcoin ATM company, so I fight the Fed for work at work, and then I come home and get to talk about all this stuff. So
Yeah.
good stuff.
Yeah. So speaking of fighting the feds and even more nefarious, their masters, the globalists, uh, Dr. Michael Rectenwald, you've written so many great books over just the last 4 or 5 years. And I think the last time we talked, uh, your current book was about to come out or had like just literally come out. So probably a lot of people who are tuned in know about it, but tell us what it is, where you got the idea, how it's going, what kind of response you're getting.
Yeah, well, the last book is called The Great Reset and the Struggle for Liberty: Unraveling the Global Agenda. And it is about the Great Reset, of course. And I go into in that book, I talk about first of all the economics of this Great Reset, what the economic order is they're trying to establish, and the means by which they're attempting to establish it. And then it goes into a great deal of depth about these globalist organizations that have contributed to the Great Reset. Uh, First of all, the World Economic Forum, but others that have been part of this globalist push for decades, if not 100 years, actually, by now. And then I treat the population ethics, as they would call it, of the Great Reset, the Malthusian and neo-Malthusian prongs of it. And then I treat the climate change catastrophism that's the main pretext for undertaking it. And then I treat the fourth industrial revolution, which is the technologies they're using uh, or hoping to use in many cases to, once the system is established, to keep it in place through surveillance technologies. And then, I address the question of conspiracy theory because it always comes up in this context. So I have a whole chapter on what about conspiracy theory. And so what if it's a conspiracy theory? Does that mean it's wrong? And yeah, that's it. And I have a 9-point plan for resisting, stopping this project as well.
Yeah, I think that we had talked about that the last time, and I think you were just kind of working on that, or were just about to release uh, that part of it. And I've always been intrigued about that, especially since the whole COVID thing. I think
Mhm.
a lot of sort of conservatives and normies are kind of, you hear them talk about Klaus Schwab and all this, and kind of are starting to get it, and
Yeah.
but they don't really have. That's what my big gripe against conservatives, as a former conservative, as a Reagan kid back in the '80s, who was very politically aware at age 10, and I was a conservative until I read Rothbard at around 17 or 18, is that conservatives, it's embedded right in the word there. They're on their back foot all the time.
Hmm.
They always want to go back 20 years. They don't really have a strategy to fight the state. It's Michael Malice's. They're just driving the speed limit. Hey, let's not go too far too quick. So that's why, as a libertarian, I see that we have some. Well, first of all, we really understand the economics. We understand why Malthusianism is wrong economically, as well as the moral implications they draw from it.
Hmm.
But I think that the whole decentralization thing, which is what we've been working on here with the Mises Caucus, is, to me, it's the only sort of fighting chance that we have, because it doesn't go through Conservatism Inc. and it sort of embraces the asymmetrical warfare resistance type stuff. So before I get your take on it, Michael, I want to ask Michael Heise, because we were just talking about that the other day about how what we're doing with Project Decentralized Revolution, which we're with the elections, kind of in between elections, are focused on candidates. It's not quite as top of mind as it has been, but why we're still doing that, why, what about that is the long-term vision, and not just, here the next couple years with the LP, but it's really looking into the future to fight exactly what Mike Rectenwald has been writing about.
Yeah, as I'm sure we'll get into in depth, wokeness and the march of wokeness through the institutions is really just an attempt to kind of astroturf culture in a way to shape policy in a way that the globalists want and the big state people want. And so we have to kind of understand that and fight back against that, I would say, at the local level, because while, yes, they have taken control of the institutions, they're trying to, use those institutions, use pop culture, use Hollywood and all of these different culture centers to impose a culture of wokeness down so that the legislation comes back up. Well, I would argue that culture in any real and organic sense comes up through the family, through the community, and then, broadens out into the macro. And that's why there's an attack on the family, because it's a strong incubator of culture and of, strength, essentially. So we have to have a political strategy that kind of embraces that and fights back against that, which is why years like this, 2023, on the surface, it might seem boring. It's the year after the midterms, the year before the presidential election, but we do have a lot of town council races, city council races, school board races, mayor races, all of that kind of stuff, where the politics is a lot more aligned with the culture, or at least as much as you're going to get in this current political environment. So that gives us an opportunity to shape the narrative from that local level and become leaders at the local level and start to get into office where it's most likely for us as libertarians, start to earn the trust of the community, and then we can use that to nullify. And the sky's the limit on what can be nullified once you get into those positions. It's really anything that's not in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution could be nullified, including all of the woke agenda, all of the globalist agenda, all of that can be nullified right from your town, and we can build these enclaves and start to connect them over time as they are trying to impose it. So that's kind of the rat race that we're in, and that is the vision of Project Decentralized Revolution.
Yeah, and for people, if you haven't read that yet and you want to get to it at some point, go to projectdecentralizedrevolution.com, and there's a little pop-up that comes up at the beginning that has a link to the article. And then Mike also kind of, it's a YouTube video of Mike reading it out. So I don't know why you would want to, it's a
comprehensive year-over-year strategy. Like, long story short, if we target races, like, we can get the data to find what of these city council races could be winnable within, like, in my state of Pennsylvania, there's over 50 city council races that could be won with 50 or less votes. So that constitutes the bottom floor. And if you go after that year one, and let's say you get, 25 of them, first of all, or 20 of them, first of all, that's more political power than the Libertarian Party has had ever, having 25 city councils in one state by itself. Yeah. Then you start to work on a program of arming them with nullification to do this. But then you come back the next year, okay, 50, the ground floor is out. Why don't we expand now to 100? And hopefully in the time between, you have done some nullification, you have created some stories, you have generated some trust, and you come back, all right, what are the seats that could be attainable at 100 votes or less? And it starts to build on itself over time, from the bottom up, through the culture, through the localities, where we really have the best shot. So all of that is available in the white paper at projectdecentralizedrevolution.com. Go there, hit the donate button, help us do this work in what is otherwise the boring time. But this is the real time, if you ask me.
Yeah, and one more quick sort of plug. Run as Libertarian, is that still up if somebody wants to be a campaign manager? Or
yep, absolutely. And we have our own funnels to recruit people. We're doing 2 trainings a month with Amy Lepore. She is our candidate support liaison. She's been doing a great job. We've recruited over 300 people to run locally, either this year or next year, for these types of races. And I'm hearing word that you might start to see some tools to support candidates from the National Party come down that we can use to embolden this strategy. And that's what it's all about. So runislibertarian.com if you want to run for city council and get support from us, or if you want to be a campaign manager for somebody else who would want to run, because that's just as important as well.
Yeah. So Dr. Rectenwald, so what in general, I've looked at your, the grand refusal stuff, but talk about the part that, the decentralized approach fits into that.
Well, it fits in perfectly. I mean, everything about globalism is it's the exact inverse of decentralization. So resisting globalism is a prerequisite, I would say, to resisting globalism. So the grand refusal's premise, the main premise is that we can't control what these globalists attempt to do, what they attempt to do. Now, we can probably foil their plans and hopefully they will relent, which is not to be expected or to be anticipated. I would think they'll double down. But the main premise is that we cut the puppet strings from ourselves and our communities. So that means the 9 points consist of a kind of a grand refusal, but there are specifics that you can undertake. And one of them is the primary thing. I think number one on the list is refusing the central bank digital currency when it's instituted. And that's going to be necessary in order to, of course, if you know anything about the central bank digital currency, CBDC, what it means is total surveillance over spending, savings, and debt by the Fed. And the Fed is a private bank, but they're also a federal agency. Likewise, it's centralized surveillance over spending monitored by the state itself. So in order to do that, in order to refuse the CBDC, we must have alternate currency in place. And that means and a network that will accept that currency. So that's all part of decentralization. I think local communities can create a currency of choice or use a currency of choice to make sure they are able to opt out of the CBDC, because the CBDC is closing the totalitarian circle. It is the end of liberty as far as the economic sphere is concerned altogether.
Yeah. Mike, we were also just talking the other day about how 10th Amendment Center, I think, has had like some of the legal tender laws and stuff like that, the legislation to reform that at the local level, and then also the BRICS countries talking about a gold-backed currency. Like, to me, like the sort of globalist agenda, I think, does sort of hinge on the Federal Reserve kind of being the ringmaster with all the other central banks in a fiat currency that they could then port over to digital. Because of course, a fiat currency would never be created out of thin air, except I don't think it could ever really practically be done. How it was done in this country is we had 100 plus years of the dollar, which was either actual gold or then backed by gold for a long time. And then they would just like, oh, gold's illegal. Now we're going to do this, within the span of, Woodrow Wilson and Roosevelt, they weaned us off of that. But like, is like the, localities making other things, so able to do contracts and things other than US dollars. And then plus, if a block of countries that doesn't want to be part of the U.S.-led, cartel, like to me, that's maybe attacking it from both ways.
Is that to Mike or me?
Yeah. Well, Mike, because you were talking about the BRICS stuff earlier today.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's got to. I mean, the number one thing that I see, and I actually want to ask Rectenwald his thoughts about this, is like Ron DeSantis had took some kind of executive action or something like that to ban a central bank digital currency within Florida. Now, my understanding is that that's through the Uniform Commercial Code. I don't know that would necessarily ban it from being quote unquote legal tender and therefore taxes being able to be paid for it. But like that's one thing that could be done. But my personal opinion is that it wouldn't be enough. It would have to be followed up with these other pieces of legislation, like a bank repository, or actually legalizing gold or silver or even Bitcoin as legal tender at the state law. So then people, or at the state level, so then people have that choice. So Rectenwald, what are your thoughts on that? And like, do you think this thing in Florida is legit? Is that like a real power move that DeSantis did, or is that like a model that we could follow? What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's a good start. It's not sufficient. It's necessary, but not sufficient. So that you're right. There has to be another currency or currencies in play that are accepted and legal. And so there's more to be done than just rejecting the CBDC and ruling it out. But it's a good start, and hopefully this kind of trend would roll across various states, and others will take note and exact the same measures. And then, of course, it should, go from the state to the local level. But it's a good start. I don't think it's the whole answer. I don't know if in the case of DeSantis, it's mere showmanship, or whether how this will play out in the actual economy. We'll see.
Yeah.
I feel like the CBDC isn't. Oh, sorry. I
No,
feel like
Brandi.
CBDC isn't a very popular concept, even in regards to like leftists and stuff. Like, I feel like there's not that many people that I like, other than people that are obviously like politicians. I'm talking about like normal people. It doesn't seem like a very popular concept. Like, not many people are like, yay.
I mean, the Fed did a study, a preliminary study on the question, and they opened it up to comments, and the comments were great. I mean, if there any indication of where people stand, there wasn't a single backer, and there were thousands of negative comments, and everybody gets the point why the CBDC is so pernicious. So yeah, I think it doesn't have popular support, but that's never been necessary for some of the measures that have been exacted and enacted on us. I don't think the COVID lockdowns were very popular. Well, except
they convinced people that it was a good
convinced
idea.
people.
They scared the hell out of them, is what they
so it's
did.
like, how are they going to convince people into thinking, like, they're going to have to, in order to implement this, they can't just implement it if it's such an unpopular idea. They're going to have to convince people that this is what they need to do, and how are they going to do that?
They'll use the idea of convenience and interoperability, and also inclusion is the big watchword here. Because they're suggesting that, there's X amount of millions of people in the country that don't have bank accounts. So the CBDC is inclusive. Anytime you hear that word inclusion, run for the hills.
But if they don't have a bank account, how are they going to have a digital currency?
It would be the same way they got checks from the state for COVID relief. It would just be granted by the state.
It'll be linked to your Social
Security. Yeah.
Linked to Social Security, maybe through UBI, Universal Basic Income, something like that. In order to give everybody an account, they'll open up they'll probably give away some amount of digital currency to everybody to opt in.
Yeah.
They'll bribe them partly.
Yeah, that would probably work. A bribe.
And your question, Brandi, actually brings me in my next question of the intellectual centers that are propagating all of this stuff. I assume they're fans of the whole problem, reaction, solution thing. My theory has always been that this is going to come on the heels of the engineered calamity. These people know what they're doing by putting us $32 trillion in debt. They know, they know that as the interest rate goes up, that the cost of servicing the debt goes up. We're at the point soon the interest payments on the debt are going to be the biggest line item in the entire government budget. What happened? They are open, like the state is openly saying that Social Security is going to be bankrupt by, I think, like 2028 or something like that, which means 2 years from now, probably. Is that part of it? Like, just the same way that they use the fear of COVID to get people to accept lockdowns for their own good, where maybe they wouldn't have if they were in more of a reasonable mindset, to kind of use the chaos of a financial collapse to pose as the savior through the new system.
That's what I think they're going to do, using bank collapses and other measures, other crises. The banks. I thought that it might have happened earlier when we started seeing some of these bank failures earlier in the spring or late spring. I thought we might see more bank failures, and then the solution will come along, of course, being proposed as the solution, which would be, central banking.
And
what do you?
Well,
Go ahead. Sorry.
I was just say if the inflation thing ever gets a little too far out of their control, then how they've been able to kind of keep it from getting too crazy. But if that ever gets too bad, I think that would also be another crisis that it won't have to make economic sense, right? Mm-hmm. Like we libertarians would be like, oh, so you're going from one fiat to just a digitized fiat, and how is that gonna, like, that's actually a move in the wrong direction, but they will be able to sell it to the masses who don't understand what money is to begin with. So, so I think that one
I'm
of
not
those
so
things,
convinced.
Well,
I think my opinion is I think they'll be able to do it to half of society, the boomer half, the one who has historically through like more of a percentage of their lives had higher trust in the institutions.
Yeah.
But the younger ones, I don't know about that. Like you're like, for example, you're seeing a revolt in the current crop of like 18-year-olds to go back to the trades, and they know they're being sold a bill of goods to some extent with college and stuff like that.
Well, I that's a good point, because I do think there are a lot of people who won't like it, but they don't have the knowledge or the wherewithal or the courage. And I'm not like calling them cowards, but like if your job is like, oh, we're only going to pay, they say, oh, anybody who's got more than 100 employees, you have to pay your people in this digital currency. Like, is somebody with the mortgage and 3 kids and a sick mom gonna like buck that? I mean, I think that we saw that with the jab. I know a lot of people who knew, who were I don't think they knew how bad it was going to be, what a health risk it was going to be, but they were suspicious. They didn't think they needed it, but they did it anyway. So I think that's the thing, is they may not have
under threat of their jobs.
Yeah, they may not have everybody fully bought into it, but especially the fact that what should be the opposition to this, if we did have a true two-party system, and we did have a Republican Party that stood for what they kind of used to say they stood for, like federalism and stuff like that, they would have a coherent way to fight back against this. So a lot of those people would have some leadership, and they would then feel comfortable and maybe, okay, the Republican Party has me covered, so I'm going to hold out and wait. But they don't have that. They have every one of those. And Trump, we're not even talking about Trump, but because that's another topic. But like every other single Republican, DeSantis included, I think they would and will fall right in line with this. And so what should be a beachhead against that is just going to be like a slightly more slowly adopting version of it, is my fear.
Someone in the chat said boomers are the largest demographic, and that's not true anymore. Millennials are now, because we were the second largest, but now millennials have surpassed the boomers. Really, I think like you have to get the millennials and Gen X and Alpha, I think that's what they are called, right? Engaged and like talking about these things and educated on these things. Like I think that's going to be our saving grace right now. Like unfortunately, the boomers are a lost cause.
Sorry to Aaron and your Gen X generation. You're the lost generation.
They've already been most people at that particular level, like boomers and Gen X, they've already solidified their opinions. I think it's way easier to change the minds of younger people because they're still figuring things out.
On the other hand, the younger people have been more recently subjected to propaganda and ideological indoctrination in public schools and the universities.
But the kids are rebelling in Massachusetts. Did you see like there are kids that are just rebelling, like kids that said like USA is my pronouns and were chanting it because they tried to make them force them to do like some pride stuff. Like kids, I think that Gen Alpha is gonna rebel, like for better or worse. Like they could pendulum swing all the way into like auth right, who knows? But like I think that the kids are rebelling. I think even COVID woke a lot of people, a lot of millennials and Gen Z up. Obviously not everyone, but I think that it's happening, and I think it's like a trickle. And I'm optimistic personally.
Well,
Even
we can only do what we can do, which is to continue to propagate, knowledge about this, what this is, and what it signifies, and spread the word, and hopefully, I think appeal to those younger generations, because they are more capable and flexible. I think because of their because as you said, they don't have these patterns of thought laid down so solidly at this juncture.
I wanted to ask Dr. Rectenwald something. I've mentioned a couple of times saying that I don't think the conservatives have a coherent sort of way to look at this. That's my gut. But like, have you, with this book and with your last few books, I think you have gotten to speak in front of some conservative audiences and podcasts and stuff.
Yeah.
What is your sense of like the, is the conservative movement even a thing now? Like what are you seeing? Are some of them getting it? Or what kind of response has this, libertarian, anti-statist / anti-globalist thing? How are they looking at what you're saying?
Wow, that's a great question. So I want to say, first of all, that the book is premised on libertarian principles. I say that straight up in the introduction. So I have been pleasantly surprised by conservatives. And this is not Conservative Inc., not the people that are bamboozling them or trying to bamboozle them with just another form of statism, but rather this is on the ground conservatives who have become, and Tucker Carlson, we talked about him before the show started, actually has been somewhat of a catalyst in this regard. There has been a greater defection of conservatives from the neocon agenda, and from, they're starting to see that statism is not the answer at all, and that they are rejecting a lot of the statist measures that come from the right. So I've been very pleasantly surprised by the reception I've gotten and the questions I've fielded from standard or conservative audiences who are very much leaning in our direction, very much.
What are some of those questions that you're hearing that you would maybe not hear at one of the Mises Caucus events you've spoken at, or Mises Institute, or a libertarian audience?
Okay. I would think people have asked me things like, well, they want to know how to resist this. This is the biggest question. I'm always having to be Mr. Answer Man after I give a talk. And that's a real problem because it's difficult to answer all the questions. They want to know how to resist it. And I tell them, and they want to know, and they're losing faith in the idea of central government doing anything for them at all. Mm-hmm. So they want to know, what do we do other than that? And I tell them, we need to model ourselves after like the Amish, not necessarily becoming neo-Luddites, but in terms of how they organize themselves without the state interfering in their behavior. And they actually are very receptive to the idea of decentralization, because I speak about it all the time in these talks, that the only answer is not to fight the central government with more central power, but to actually pull out of it and to attempt to create autonomous or semi-autonomous communities that are disjunct from and that are independent of, to the extent possible, federal state power. And this very much, it resonates with these people now.
One thing
Yeah,
I wanted to ask a question, and I'll shut up for a little while. I know I always talk too much. I know it. I know it.
Yeah, let's hear more from Brandi. I want to hear,
Well,
hear her thoughts.
well, this question actually loops in Brandi. So, like, I know she's much more active on Twitter than I am because I hate Twitter, both before and after Elon. But as someone who has written a lot about big tech,
Yeah.
I'm going to have Brandi respond first, and then get your take on. Are things changing in regard to big tech? Are they being more? Is free speech a little better off now in this fight against globalism and against the state? Where do you guys, and again, Brandi first, like, are things better now than they were 2 years ago? And where do you see things going? I want you both to chime in on that.
I mean, a little bit, but I still don't think that Elon is some like champion for free speech. I think that's kind of just the pitch, to be completely honest. I don't think that Twitter is like that. They're still banning people, and it's still people that with ideas that they don't like. And I think that Elon kind of I don't know how you feel about this, Michael, but like I think that Elon is not against the global agenda, even though he kind of paints himself to be.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of see him as someone that is still doing their bidding. Just he's trying to paint himself as someone that is like fighting for the good guys, you know. But I don't really see it that way. Especially, I mean, didn't he just hire the CEO that is the WEF lady?
Yeah, Linda Yaccarino. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's my opinion. I still don't think that Twitter is, maybe it's better for people that are more right leaning.
let me give one pushback to that.
Okay.
And I'm not even pushing back that he's not a globalist or anything like that. I'm not equipped to speak on that. What I will say though is that he is enabling mass conversations that just otherwise wouldn't exist. I would kill for when you see Elon having town halls with RFK or having town halls with DeSantis or something like that. You know, say what you want about DeSantis. I would have killed for Ron Paul to have that opportunity in 2012.
Yeah.
It just simply did not exist. And I don't know that we realize how big of a shift it is for him to kind of have that alternate way of kind of like learning about our candidates, or even just with whatever the nature of the conversation itself and the framing of it and what that says about the reality of politics today. You know, so like when you take Elon doing that over here, and then you take the Tucker Carlson presidential forum that he did the other day, hosted by Blaze, who we have friends in Blaze as libertarians. And the kind of questions, I mean, that he was asking Nikki Haley and all of them, asking, well, whose cocaine was that? Like challenging them to just be real a little bit. You know what I mean? Like, this stuff just didn't exist, and it's going to take time for it to proliferate. But I think, I mean, look at what has happened to Tucker ever since they got rid of him at Fox. I predicted on Tim Pool that he hasn't even evolved into his ultimate form yet. And now, boom, millions and millions and millions of people watching that town hall. I just think that regardless of Musk's shortcomings, that he is facilitating a whole totally alternative conversation that didn't exist before.
I mean, so I agree with that, but I will also say he knows his demographic and he cares about the bottom line, and there's incentive. So Twitter's mostly, I think, like, more people that are like right leaning are on Twitter, and also more men than women. So like he understands his demographic. Like having Tucker talking to Andrew Tate also makes sense. I think Twitter's 75% male. Like I think it's like he gets the demographic and he's going to market towards what demographics already there, in my opinion.
Well, yeah, I mean, I agree with both of you in a way. I would say that I think that Musk, and this is another issue, really is a very ambiguous figure. But more importantly, and I also agree with you, Brandi, that his appointment of Linda Yaccarino, who is not the chairman and founder and chair of the World Economic Forum. She merely, and you didn't say this, but people on Twitter did. They said that she was the founder, or she was the chairman of the World Economic Forum. She's the chair of a particular forum on the forum, in that forum, a particular colloquium, I guess, of the forum. So, but there's things that unfortunately that Musk will not be able to do, and this is not necessarily his fault, but the EU is going to attempt to pass and impose laws on their users, no matter what forums they're on, and they are using the Digital Services Act, I think it's called, to attempt to do this, so that Musk might have to abide by these globalist criteria and, effectively edicts that are coming down from the EU and from these globalist organizations like the WEF, who has been very, very powerful and in imposing censorship, especially on the COVID narrative. So there's some things that he cannot do, but I agree with Mike too, that he has opened up the possibility for some conversation. So while Musk is not a hero, and I've written about this, we need to exploit whatever we can, whatever niches open up, and there is the potential niche there that can be exploited while it lasts. And so I think we should do that. But I agree with Brandi that Musk is he's no free market libertarian. He's come out against the ESG, but only because Tesla was thrown off the S&P 500's ESG top 10 or altogether from their ESG index.
He was about it before.
Yeah, he didn't have a problem with it before. In fact, he was benefiting from it. Tesla has been benefiting from that. And so, that being said, I think it's just he's not a hero to put our hope in, but he is opening up opportunities that we should exploit.
I have a question. I want to jump back a little bit and then kind of have almost like a back to basics conversation on the WEF and stuff like that. But you had said earlier that you thought you thought the collapse would have happened by now. That it's not as.
I thought they were going to accelerate it with the bank failures. Yeah.
What do you think that is? Because I have a theory, but I'm like, what do you think that is? How do you think it's buoying this way and limping along as long as it is?
I think it's just an incrementalism. There's a kind of incrementalism, and a kind of 2-step, 3-step dance, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, in order to habituate people to the prospects, so that you don't want to put the frog in boiling water right away. You want to boil it turn it up 1 degree at a time so that it doesn't jump out of the pot. Effectively, I think that's what's going on.
Are you familiar with the milkshake theory?
No, I'm not. Yeah, I like the burning of the frog boiling metaphor, but if you have a better one, go for it.
Oh, no, that's a perfect metaphor, and it's not at odds with this. And I've known about this for a while. I've heard Jeff Dice start to talk about this, I want to say, in the past year or so. But it was a theory put forward by a financial analyst named Brent Johnson, and he actually had a debate with Peter Schiff about this, and I think he's being proven right. The idea, it's a stupid name in my opinion, but with the idea of the milkshake theory is essentially that regardless of what we do to abuse the dollar here at home, and regardless of how much we print and all of that, that because we are the reserve currency of the world, that gives us relative strength against all of the other currencies who themselves are, abusing and printing their currencies. Mm-hmm. So that as you start to see, the nature of central banking come home to roost around the country, that is as much as we see price inflation here at home, you see an actual strengthening of the dollar in global markets as other currencies fall faster than us.
I have read this. I didn't remember it was the milkshake theory, but yeah, I've read this theory. Yeah,
and I think that's it. And I think I think we haven't really thought about that, which means that we might have a long way to go, and domestic prices a lot higher to go until that all comes to pass, because that would mean that you need to see the falling of other currencies first, Mm-hmm. And the idea with the dollar being the reserve currency, it's like Highlander. You know what I mean? Like we would
Mhm.
be the last fiat standing in a rat race to the bottom.
Yeah, that's about right. I think that's probably right. We've got all these other currencies that have to come down first, and that would even strengthen the dollar as the rest of the currencies fall. I think that's the basic idea, right? Even though we're headed downhill, it'll look like we're actually
In global markets, at least. Yeah.
yes, yeah. It'll look to us as if the dollar is gaining strength, but it'll only be relative to the other currencies.
Yeah.
But then it would be stronger, absolutely, at least in the short term.
Yeah. So, unless you guys had any other questions, I had I wanted to almost like go back to basics on the WEF and kind of continue we went off on like a bunch of tangents.
Now, that's what we're here for, right? I mean, we need to let these things flow, because this kind of things that come up into people's minds.
Absolutely. So what, for somebody who doesn't know, what exactly is the WEF, and how does this organization have the ability to enact its agenda? You know what I mean? Because
Right.
this is an area where I think libertarians have really struggled in the past, 3, 4, 5 years. It's a private company, man, and like coming to terms with the reality of corporatism.
Yeah, this is a big point, and I've been trying to get this across in libertarian circles for years now, and with my idea of the governmentalities and all that. But the WEF is an international NGO, and they see their role as establishing global governance. That's what they're attempting to bring about. And how they're doing it is not directly through the state. This is why I think it's eluding a lot of libertarians. And I even talked with Walter Block about this on my own podcast, Rekt, R-E-K-T, by the way, a little plug
Subscribe.
There. Yeah, you won't find it because I'm so shadow banned everywhere on Twitter and Facebook and especially YouTube and Google. But anyway, they're doing it through corporations, actually. The WEF is a international NGO whose main object right now is to bring about the meeting of the UN's Agenda 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. And they aim to do this by establishing what they call public-private partnerships. And that is partnerships between the state or states and corporations. And they are signing on these corporate partners. They have over 1,000 major corporate partners from all over the world in all of the top, in all the industries, and the top players in all of those industries. And they get them to sign on to this idea of stakeholder capitalism, which is the new economic order that the Great Reset attempts to establish. And the mechanism for this stakeholder capitalism is the Environmental, Social, and Governance Index on the stock market and in banking and in insurance and so forth. So what they're doing is signing all these corporate partners on to roll out this stakeholder capitalism regime. And stakeholder capitalism is what they claim it is, and what it is are two different things. It's a cartel scheme that is meant to, first of all, control corporations from centralized governance, from a centralized global governance standpoint, forcing them to abide by the ESG index scores, and forcing them out of business if they don't abide, by virtue of depriving them of capital investments. Larry Fink is a board member of the World Economic Forum, the board of directors, and he is also the leading edge of the ESG drive, although he's now saying they're not going to use the phrase ESG anymore. But that doesn't mean anything. It's just going to be a rose by another name will smell the same. And they're forcing these corporations into abiding by these ESG indexing. And it is affecting the entire economy. And there's been pushback, but it's nothing compared to what this regime represents as it is. So the World Economic Forum is the center for pushing this stakeholder regime. And by stakeholder, what they mean is that everybody is a stakeholder in corporations. But really what it means is that there are only certain stakeholders in the economy, those that are approved by the ESG stakeholder regime, and barring those who are not approved. And this is driving up prices. It'll drive up, it distorts the market. It also then is followed up by state regulations. So it's kind of like a pre or extra governmental system that then is followed up by regulations by the state. So these companies are being told that you need to get out ahead of the state. If the state wasn't there to do the regulations, this would not be happening because there would be no threat. But they're telling these companies, if you don't get out ahead of this, you will be sanctioned by the state. Eventually, you'll be sanctioned because you won't meet the regulatory requirements to operate. So that's how they're doing this.
So in theory, because it's being done through corporations,
yeah,
doesn't that mean theoretically that this could be combated in the marketplace through what you might call like conscious capitalism? I hate this because it kind of goes against the whole beauty of capitalism to me, but like, you know, one example
it should be battled by unconscious capitalism. And that is to say capitalism that doesn't have an overriding interventionist operating system, which is what this is. This is like this centralized interventionism coming from extra governmental organs like the World Economic Forum and the UN. The UN is a big driver of this too. They've gotten 4,700 asset managers, banks, and investment firms to sign on to their principles of responsible investment, which say, all 6 of them basically say, we will do ESG, we will do ESG. I mean, it's very outrageous. It's like, so. Yeah.
I may have misspoke. What I meant was conscious consumerism. Right.
Yes.
For example, it would be a light version of this, but the Bud Light boycott. If that could perhaps be harnessed, that energy could perhaps be harnessed in other areas to identify the corporations who are going along with this and then going another way.
Yes, but the problem is it's so many of them that you almost can't find any exceptions. Yeah. And that's because the ESG is so widely pervasive now. But there are exceptions and we can build on them. So I recommend, and as part of my 9-point plan, is to divest from ESG companies and to pull your money out of ESG dictatorial banks. And that's most of the majors, because they're feeding this beast. They're determining whether you're capital investment worthy on the basis of your ESG score. And they're determining, the banks are determining whether you're worthy of loans on the basis of your ESG score. So this has to be fought by consumers in blocks of consumers who will then divest and invest in non-ESG companies and banks and get their money, if you have assets, if you have stocks, etc., out of ESG dictatorial asset managers, stock portfolios, banks, etc.
Do you have another book lined up that you're going to write?
Oh, that's
because I have an idea.
Who are you? Look who you're asking. This is Michael Rectenwald. He writes a book every 6 months. So go ahead.
Not quite, but I did have 5 in the last 5 years. Well, this interesting. What do you have in mind?
This sounds like somebody should write the book of how to live outside of ESG. And like the examples would be like you said, all right, get out of the major banks. So that could be, go to, maybe go to a regional bank, go to a credit union, go to Bitcoin, go to infinite banking, and like all of these different alternatives. And then it's like, okay, how do you escape the medical industrial complex? And then you can talk about direct care providers and combined with health share plans to get around the insurance cartels and the medical industrial complex, and
Mm-hmm.
you know, just kind of all of these holes in society to escape the matrix. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah,
just
that's right.
yeah.
That's what the 9-point plan is trying to exploit. It could be blown up into a treatise. Actually, you're right, and I don't think I could do it myself alone. I would need like a co-author for that, because I would need somebody, probably 3 co-authors. You know, because I can't possibly master all those fields. You
Let's. I'll maybe talk to you about this offline, Dr. Rectenwald,
Yeah.
because I'm having some ideas running through my head, and we've been thinking about new things to do as far as content here at the Mises Caucus. So maybe an anthology type stuff with you, maybe overseeing it or something like that. So let me. I'll shoot you an email. We'll talk.
Yeah, I'd be interested in that. I think that's a good idea, and I would love to edit. I love editing. I've edited several volumes of books, and I love doing that.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Go, Brandi.
So because like ESG, when it comes to the WEF, like, what do you think the goal is? Because like, is ESG isn't the goal? It's almost like the precursor to get to the goal. Is the goal a centralized one world government? Is it just one government? Is that the goal? Because if that's the goal, then I don't think that, like how you said, like, oh well, now they're gonna rebrand. I think that the WEF and ESG, like, it's got bad branding. Like, people don't like it anymore, so they're gonna just figure out something else. And
the new gay order.
Like, no, because that's the thing. If that's not the goal, though, like the goal is one world government. The tools that they're using to get there are just tools, but they don't need to use those tools. They can.
Well, yeah, that's a great point.
They could change directions. They could use other things as well, like.
Yeah, except they do have, like everybody else, they have limited resources. We all face scarcity as the main premise of all of our economic actions. So they've invested a great deal in this climate change, or I call it climate change catastrophism. Mm-hmm. This is they've invested a great deal into this. What is the main goal of this? I think it is, first of all, the ESG is a monopoly scheme, it's a shared monopoly scheme. It's a cartel scheme.
Yep.
It's a way to drive out competition and eliminate players from the market and to monopolize the marketplace. Then it also is a global governance scheme, because what they do is they posit this global crisis, and then they say that the only solution to a global crisis is global governance. So we need to have this overarching global governance to control. And I won't call it, it is world government, but they're basically using a network model for this world government. Like, it's network. Yeah.
I want to take a crack at that. So as libertarians being anti-statist, I think we tend to talk about, when we talk about public-private partnerships, I'm going to put this comment back up. I put it
yes, that's
up
right.
A minute ago. And my thing is, I think as libertarians, we focus a lot on the Klaus Schwabs, the Nancy Pelosi's, the Joe Biden, the state side of things. But like in fascism, it is a partnership between the corporate interests and the government, and I think that those people have different goals. So like the guy in charge of BlackRock and Vanguard and General Motors and Apple, like those guys who are on those boards, and they just want to make money. Mm-hmm. And so if they're at the top of the pile, there's this thing called the state that I can use, influence, lobby to rewrite the rules of the game, so I can boost my share price. So most of those guys don't care about all the ESG stuff and the social engineering stuff. Some of them maybe, but like it's just an easy. It's a way to do business.
Yes, you don't think there's a will to power on the corporate end?
Well, but their will to power is their bottom line. Yeah. Like I don't think a lot of them really don't care. Like those type of guys, they don't have no interest in like writing bills to like whatever. They just want to make sure their share price is up and they get their bonuses and all that. And so it's interesting. So like we think of fascism as like the Nazis or whatever, and having that racial element, and
Yeah.
people say, well, that's not what's going on here. But if you look at what the guys on the No Agenda podcast call the trans Maoism stuff, and the CRT stuff, and the all the other stuff, that's the racial identity element of modern day fascism, is the opposite, right?
Yes,
Is the
that's right.
opposite of what we think of. So
Yeah, that's right.
a lot of the people that sign on for this, whether it's college professors, CEOs, Congress humans, whatever, they're in it for a different reason, but they all think they are going to be driving it and going to be end up on top. And who knows what's actually happening and who's actually pulling the strings. But I think that's wise, because they're not all in agreement on, I want the world to look exactly the same way. They have diverging goals, but that people like Klaus Schwab are the almost social entrepreneurs who are
That's right.
getting all of these things to merge up.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Altogether. Okay, so I agree with everything you've said there. Just let me say a little bit about it in this regard. So yeah, there's divergent interests. The state and these corporations don't have the same interests, but the ESG and the stakeholder regime is a means by which these corporations are attempting to elude state intervention and preempt it, even not necessarily preempt it, I mean, but to pre-qualify for it. So it's a kind of pre-qualification scheme to make them qualified to stand up to state scrutiny and state regulations in advance. And it also a means for them to drive out their competitors from business. And it's a means for them to those two things. And then where was I going from there? The ESG is sorry, I'm just losing my train of thought here. But what I was getting at here is, yeah, then so the state and those corporations have different agendas, but they're trying to, and Klaus Schwab is exactly, that's where I want to go, is the coordinator who's trying to, Klaus Schwab in the World Economic Forum is the coordinating, kind of like a quarterback on the field who's trying to execute the plays to kind of try to bring these two interests into sync. Okay, in the long run, there's no way it can work. And right now, it's kind of a battle between, on the woke side of it, that is to say, the social score element of this. This is where all of the woke, what has come to be known as woke capitalism, is coming from. The S part of the ESG is determined according to other indexes, like the Human Rights Campaign's corporate something index. I forget it. The Human Rights Campaign has a corporate index that rates corporations on the basis of their trans friendliness. Let's put it that way. So that's why you have companies like Bud Light and Target and Disney and all these companies. So we have a battle between finance capital on the one hand and the consumer base on the other. Consumer capital, if you will, on the other hand. There's a battle going on. And these companies are going woke because they know where their investment capital is coming from. They know where it's coming from. It's coming from these companies, these asset managers that are all bought in and forcing this agenda down their throats. And so if they don't go along with it, they face extinction prospects. So the question is, like, do I want to worry about alienating 30% of the consumer base, or do I want to worry about alienating Larry Fink and BlackRock and Vanguard and State Street and UBS and a whole slew of other investment asset managers?
Is it only 30%? Like, well, so if, for example, wokeness is no longer popular, like, I mean, I feel like it's already happening slowly. Like, wokeness is just slowly not being cool anymore. Most people are just sick of it.
Yeah.
And it's getting, I think that's going to grow and continue to grow personally. But so if that happens, and if it's like, okay, well, the consumers don't want it anymore and they're sick of it and it's just not happening, and the percentage of those people continue to grow, can't they just shift gears and be like, oh, well, okay, we're not going to use wokeness anymore. We're going to use some other
criteria
cultural tool. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think that's true. I mean, this is the case that monopolists and cartels use different criteria in order to control the market. And so wokeness just happens to be one that they're using now. There have been other criteria in the past, and they will probably shift to a different criteria in the future. So I agree with that. I just wanted to say that the index that I was referring to from the Human Rights Campaign is called the Corporate Equality Index. This is what's driving all this trans-friendly consumer advertising and propaganda. So, yeah.
No,
So
I think
it would
go
it would
ahead.
probably be very interesting to look at the financial statements of Bud Light then, for example, because we know they're losing a huge market share, but if their financial statements are staying stable while they're losing the market share, that would kind of, I think, answer the question of, is the goose or the gander the bigger thing here?
Yeah.
Well, I think what Dr. Rectenwald was saying, and what I've heard other people say, is like that's how deep this runs.
Mhm.
Is that if you're willing to basically tell a significant chunk of your audience, like, we literally don't care about you and we don't want you as a customer, basically, that just goes to show that the power of the guy who has his hand on the money faucet, right? Like, that's the guy you have to appease, because at some point, certain things, like, if you want to buy a car, for instance, like all the car companies, as far as I know, unless you're buying like a super boutique, whatever. I don't know if any of Ferrari or any of those companies are still privately or family held. I don't think many, if any, but basically, like, nobody wants electric cars. Like, they have to be heavily subsidized. They all suck. They're all ugly. It's because of the corporate emissions regulations and the subsidies that the only reason why people buy them. And once the batteries start running out, people are going to be like, yeah, these suck. But like, the companies don't care, because A, they're regulated on the emission stuff, and B, they get the subsidies, including Elon Musk, for the green crap. So like, if those two things are more important than consumer demand, or a significant strand of consumer demand, which shows you that we're not anywhere close to being what a capitalist country should be.
To Brandi's point, though, I think that there's this thing about wokeness. So wokeness is just one. Woke capitalism is like one strand of this whole regime. The other big strand is the climate change catastrophism strand. And I think that we're going to have to. Libertarians are going to have to take on this issue directly, which I attempted to do in my book. And this has to be fought not only in terms of the economy, but in terms of science. And that's going to be daring. That's going to be difficult. That's going to get you branded as a climate change denier, which is, of course, plays off of the Holocaust denier narrative, which means you are like a reprobate of the worst order, and you must be, disappeared. But this has to be dealt with directly, and I think that may not be popular in libertarian circles, because we don't like to necessarily engage issues that seem to be out of our purview, but it isn't out of our purview, because it is affecting the economy directly at this point. Not the climate change itself, the catastrophism. Yeah.
I think it is interesting how the narrative changed since I was in high school. It was environment, caring about the environment, but now it's climate change, and like that's like a complete shift. Like, because caring about the environment, that made sense. Yeah, take care of the environment. Like, throw your trash away. Yeah, and then now it's all about the complete narrative of how we talk about it is completely shifted from when like 10, 20 years ago to now.
Recycle and eat crickets.
No,
Like that.
That's right.
You know what?
Talk
The
about-
crickets taste good. I'm not against it. All right, I'll eat a bug.
Well, if it's covered in chocolate, maybe.
Yeah,
but
you
like,
know,
you
chocolate
talk
covered
about
ants.
what you learned in high
when
school.
they make meats unavailable, that's going to
Yeah.
be a different story, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, for sure.
You said what you learned in high school. I remember I was in like this summer camp type thing when I must have been like 6 or 7. So this was like very early 80s. I remember that this is one of the things that makes me know that like I was born a libertarian, and I just kind of like eventually discovered it. I
Yeah.
can see this kid. It was like a college kid who came in to talk to us about like recycling. I can still picture him, and he told us literally, if you don't recycle your pop cans, we're going to have another ice age. So and so like even at 6 years old, I was like, I know that's full of it.
Yeah.
And so like, but that's the thing. It was in the 70s or early 80s. It was the ice age. Then it was global warming,
Yeah.
and then climate change, because it's a problem that can never be solved.
Right.
Yeah.
It's always going to be changing. Like it always.
It's the
points to
perpetual war or the perpetual revolution.
Yeah.
Yes, it's unfalsifiable because they keep pushing the consequences into the future.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So scientifically, you can't falsify this.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
this is
So-
a big part of it. The regime.
Dr. Rectenwald, you
You used to, by the way, you can call me Dr. Rec. That's what my students used to call me at NYU.
Okay, we'll do
Okay.
that because I was calling you
Good
that because we got 2 Michaels, and so I was like,
Yeah.
and I don't want to just call you Rectenwald because it's this, but
Dr.
yeah, so
Rec is good. Yeah.
Dr. Rec, yeah.
So my understanding is that Jordan Peterson is hosting a some kind of conference over in Europe to act as a counter to this.
Yes.
Do you know anything about that, or do you want to tell us anything about that?
Yes, it's I was invited actually, and I have accepted the invitation. Not because I'm sure about the agenda or the people involved, but because I want to be there to see what's going on. And it's called ARC. It's called ARC. ARC. That's the acronym. It's it's the. Let me
He
see.
would use a biblical acronym.
Yeah, they did. That's right. They used
JP, of course.
It makes sense though.
Biblical symbolism. I know it does.
Peterson. Let me just get the whole name here. It is yes, the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship, ARC. It's being established as a international community with a vision for a better world, et cetera, et cetera. And I was invited to attend. I usually don't go anywhere unless I'm speaking, just so you know. But I'm going to go to this, even though it's in London and it's going to be expensive and I'm not being paid. I'm going to go to see what their agenda is. I don't like. I got to say right up front, I don't like any kind of elites, whether there be counter elites or elites, telling me what I should do in terms of being responsible and what that consists of. That to me is the polar opposite of decentralization in a sense.
Yeah, I hate the whole like responsible citizen language.
Yeah.
I hate that.
I don't like it either. They also have some language that I think is it really accords with progressivism. It's for example, they say the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. That's a very progressivist notion.
Is that MLK? Was that him?
No, that's not necessarily
This is
MLK.
before him.
Maybe it is MLK, but the idea there is that there's this progress narrative in history, and it tends towards betterment. Then they tell you what betterment is. That's the big question. What is betterment? What is progress consist of? And it's all in terms of the progressives, it's always meant more of what more social welfare.
Yeah, we could never dip back into the dark ages because we're on the progressive line of history.
Right.
Doesn't
Yeah.
that seem to go at odds with what I'm not the Jordan Peterson expert here, but I have listened to quite a bit of him. But like, isn't his point that what I've gotten from him implicitly is that, well, we have to better ourselves and make moral choices because we're always on the edge of exactly the opposite happening.
Yeah.
So it seems weird to me that he would go along. What's
He
your
does
take
seem
on
to
that,
have
Mike?
some. Oh, sorry. I
No,
was gonna
no,
say.
you could go too, but I know Mike's an expert on Jordan.
She's a Jordan Peterson chick too.
Okay.
Well, I was gonna say that he does seem to have like a. He talks about justice, but like not in like a social justice way. Like, I don't know, Mike. Do you know what I mean?
What I would if that came from Peterson, what I would suspect he meant is that moral knowledge constitutes a form of social evolution that we have evolved with. You know what I mean? Like if you were to go back to a more primitive time, things were generally speaking much more barbaric because we were much poorer, we didn't have the standards. Moral knowledge isn't exactly what was at the forefront of people's minds. We were much more tribal and warlike. And as we've come, especially into the Industrial Revolution and the advent of capitalism and standards rise, moral standards have increased. If I had to guess, that is, where he's going there. But I meant to pull that up because I think it's pretty cool that you were invited, and it might be some way that to create a brain trust and a network to figure out some ways to fight back against this. And I don't want to betray confidences, but I think you're going to have some libertarian friends there.
Oh, good.
And I'll have to text you. But I had suggested to one of the other people who was invited that we have a crew going over there, and he said, yeah, maybe we can all sit together at the lunch table. So
Yeah, we can mock the globalists that might be there. There might be some globalists that with a different type of globalism. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
They said here, for example, it says, "Can we find a unifying story that will guide us as we make our way forward?"
See, again, that tracks with
like
Peterson, Aaron. It tracks with Peterson. He would argue that the Bible is a unifying story, and again, that it's a social evolution. We don't have to go into the Peterson rabbit hole, but
yeah, we should do a show on that sometime. I've got a couple new lines.
Yeah, let's not talk about Peterson here because when I first came out against social justice and all that in the early days, people were like, "Yo, you're the American Jordan Peterson." I was like, "No, he's the Canadian Michael Rectenwald." But anyway. I'm going to go just to see what this is about, and I want to also see if I can lend some perspective that comes from our camp. That is the decentralization.
Exactly. That's going to need a voice.
One thing I wanted to say before we go, and I'm not sure exactly, Dr. Reck, it's up to you when you decide to go.
I can go till 9.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's interesting that we have people on the oldest person and I think the youngest person on this podcast both came from the extreme left. So I wanted you guys to have a chance to talk to each other about coming from being Marxist communists to becoming libertarians and see what similarities and what differences in each of your stories was.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to go first?
No, Brandi, you go. Everybody, far more people know his story, so why don't you go first?
So I was Marxist, Leninist, and it really came down to the fact that I blamed everything on capitalism. Mm-hmm. And then as I got older, I started to realize that all of the things that I blamed on capitalism were actually because of the government, and it took me a while to get there. And then also starting a business and stuff really made me realize that there's so many that the government holds so many people back, has so many barriers to entry for people to actually make it, and the more I started to realize, the more I was like, wow, okay, everything that I believed was kind of false. But I think that I always had the symptoms. I diagnosed the symptoms accurately. I just didn't diagnose the cause accurately, which I think a lot of people, like a lot of socialists and communists, I think that that's the case for a lot of them, is that they have the symptoms right. They just don't have the diagnosis of the cause of the symptoms right.
I have to agree with you 100% on that. I think you're absolutely right. I was in the same camp. I did the same thing. I saw the social ills that that were quite apparent, and thought that they were all due to capitalism. I thought the capitalist class was the ruling class, and that this ruling class had set up society in such a way as to strictly benefit themselves, and that I believed in the labor theory of value and the idea that all the workers were exploited at the point of production, and that profit really equaled the margin of exploitation and all that Marxist gobbledygook. And it took a while to unravel it. I first fell out of it from a political standpoint by virtue of seeing the totalitarian nature of the left when they came after me after I criticized social justice. And then it took a while to get into the economic analysis, which I started with Mises. Mises was my real deprogrammer. Mises was I said on a tweet recently, it was like economic psychoanalysis, really. He got and unraveled all of the psychological adhesions I had and distortions and repressions and mistakes that I had harbored, and just totally unraveled them all and made clear. So, and a lot of it was based on resentment, and so that came to the surface. And he makes that clear that that's driving a lot of this is resentment. But and then the economic calculation problem made it clear to me that it wasn't even possible. Socialism, that is, it's not even possible even theoretically. So yeah, it was a long journey. I think I've recounted it in several books, so I don't want to bore people with that.
Just one quick question. What was your entry? Which work of Mises was your entry point?
Socialism and economic and sociological analysis.
So he was like the third for me, because it was Milton Friedman and Thomas Sowell were kind of like my economic like gateways into just like learning about capitalism and seeing things in a completely different way. And then it was Mises and Hayek.
Okay. Yeah, my progression was Mises, Rothbard, and then Hoppe. And that might not be popular.
You're a man of culture.
No, I was gonna say that's the way to go.
I'm probably the only minarchist here. Dirty minarchist.
Yeah, we're gonna complete your training. And don't worry about that.
I have an anarchist deep in my heart.
Down the line.
Yeah, and there was a really good interview that Dave Rubin did with Thomas Sowell, and they were talking about his breaking out of being a communist too. And Rubin asked him, what it was that did it, and just in classic Thomas Sowell fashion, he goes, "Facts." It was facts.
Yeah. For me, it was trauma first. First of all, it was trauma. I had to be traumatized out of the left by virtue of the left's attack on me. And then as I regained my senses, I emerged from Plato's cave and faced some disorientation because I was seeing things, without these ideological blinders on. And it was just, it was a pretty long process because, a few years, because I was not just a Marxist. I was writing for Marxist periodicals and, publishing in Marxist tracts and stuff like that. Yeah.
And it's hard when you build your identity around something like that. It's very hard to break out when your whole identity is built around like an ideology, because like it becomes part of you. And so it's like, it's heartbreaking when you're breaking up with this ideology. And I definitely know what you mean when you say like trauma, because I would say like I had moved to being moderate at this time. Like I would be a capitalism, but I was a capitalist, but I was like, I'm like a centrist, but it took trauma for me to go full on libertarian. Like to go all the way. I got canceled, so I think I got canceled. So I think that was what really like pushed me over the edge to like being like, okay, I'm a libertarian now.
Yeah, I'm still getting canceled to this day. I got canceled on a date. I mean, this is kind of like, I got canceled on a date. I looked up your politics. No thanks. Goodbye.
You dodged a bullet.
Yeah. Thank God that happened.
Did she do this before or after you paid for dinner?
Before, thankfully, yeah.
There you go.
All we had is a Zoom interview, and that was it. Our Zoom.
You could have tested her on the socialistic theory of paying for the first date.
Well, I would have paid. I don't buy into that, and I'm chivalristic.
I will say that getting canceled was the best thing that ever happened to me, though, because it took getting canceled for me to because I was producing events for a company, and they ended up asking me to retire from my position. And afterwards, I ended up producing my own events, and then and started doing it myself, and they were all super successful, and it was really scary because I was like, oh my god, everyone's gonna hate me because they all think I'm this horrible racist person. But my shows were so successful, and it took getting canceled to just make that jump and doing it on my own.
Yeah. I'm sure you were called every name in the book: racist, sexist, homophobe, transphobe, Nazi, alt-right, short pants white devil.
Mostly racist.
Satan. I was called Satan as well. Yeah.
It's amazing. Yeah. Yeah, I think it's funny that I think a lot of the left, a lot of the Bernie Sanders people, I think were diagnosing the thing, getting close there, and which goes back to my theory, and I think Dave Smith has talked about this, but back in when the Occupy movement and the Ron Paul movement were both kind of starting to talk about the same things and mention the Federal Reserve, that's when if you look at the instances of things like CRT and terms like that are now terms that we cannot escape, that we hear talked about and debated every other day, but were unheard of in 2009 among the general public. All that started as a way to distract the left and the right from, meeting and doing all that. So I think you're seeing some of the same thing with the RFK type stuff too. Again, I think he's really dumb on a lot of stuff, but he's really great on a lot of stuff. And to have him be the Democrat nominee, that would just be a great shift in the Overton window. And they're going to do everything they can to keep that from happening.
Yeah, and don't put it past them. I mean, look at his.
But if climate is the end goal, how do we know that he wouldn't be a ideal candidate theoretically? How do we know he would not? I know that he's anti-establishment in a lot of other ways.
I was shocked when I heard his answer recently when asked directly about the climate. It sounded like Ron Paul. I couldn't believe it.
We should have free market solutions for it.
I couldn't believe it. It sounded
anti-nuclear though. Nuclear.
Yeah.
I hate that word.
Well, we're coming up on time here, so I'm going to give Brandi. I'm going to give you one argument to hopefully help push you towards the anarchist edge. And this is kind of a concession that I actually make towards the communist types because they focus on corporate power and its influence over society and political power and all of that stuff. And of course, that's a real problem. What I would say, though, is that the state, as long as you have capitalism plus the state, there's always going to be an incentive towards corporatism. Because there's always going to be the opportunity due to the human fallibility to purchase the power of the state. And then now the communist side is going to say, well, then we need to get money out of politics and all this stuff and basically restrict money. But we as Misesians understand that, that human will to buy power or to purchase power and power peddle and all this stuff is going to be there regardless. And also so is the desire for a price system and the desire for trade and the desire for division of labor. So you can have money and build society across that division of labor. You don't necessarily need the state to do that, though. So that's kind of where it breaks down. There's always that incentive when you have capitalism plus the state.
Yeah, it always comes back to things like the military and stuff like that. That is hard for me to reconcile. Because if you don't have a military, you become very vulnerable as a country. And so people say we would have I mean, I think I play a lot of Civilization. Okay, like I feel like
There's a
Hoppe book on this actually.
well, I'll
It's a
send you
complete journey. Yeah.
a free book. It's a little short. It's also the Hoppe thing and also Chaos Theory by Bob Murphy. I will send you that, and then we'll talk after that, and we'll see.
But going back to the fallibility point, this is where some minarchists would say, well, that's the whole problem, is that humans are fallible, therefore you need the state. And that's why, that's kind of a Christian free market viewpoint as well, that because we live in a fallen world, we need to have some sort of overarching thing. And I think that's wrong. I got to say, the state consists of people who are also fallible. So why should
it rewards the fallibility?
Yeah.
And
they're rewarded for it. Indeed.
Absolutely. But one last thing, I wanted to hear. You wanted to say something about conspiracy theories, Dr. Rex. So say, give us your train of thought on that. We won't be able to explore it, but
are the frogs gay?
Well, I have a whole chapter on the question of conspiracy theory in my book, The Great Reset and the Struggle for Liberty. And the basic premise is that a theory isn't wrong for being a conspiracy theory. A theory is wrong if it doesn't if it's not supported by the evidence. So this whole phrase, conspiracy theory, of course, as an epithet, began with the CIA. We know that in connection with JFK and assassination. But it was seeded by Karl Popper in his book, The Open Society and Its Enemies. He talked about the conspiracy theory of society and then dismissed it as implausible and impossible. And therefore, they took that and then he used it to dismiss all theories that weren't backed by the state, frankly. So what conspiracy theory really represents is all theories that posit a conspiracy that aren't floated by the state. That's really what a conspiracy theory is when you get it in a negative, pejorative sense. And of course, because the state has its own conspiracy theories all the time. Take 9/11, they have a conspiracy theory about that. It was a conspiracy of, Islamic fundamentalist terrorists. So there's always a, conspiracy theory itself should be rescued from opprobrium. Make conspiracy theory great again. That's my, that's all I got to say about it, I guess.
Okay.
Dr. Rectenwald, where can people find your work, find and purchase your work and follow you on social media?
And talk about the new podcast.
And my new podcast is called Rekt, R-E-K-T, which is hosted and sponsored by the Mises Institute. And you can find it through their media page. My own work altogether, including the podcasts, are all kept at michaelrectenwald.com. That's RECTENWALD.com, michaelrectenwald.com. All my books, articles, etc. I don't charge for articles. I don't go on Substack. I keep everything there. Central spot for all of my work.
Yeah, well, I really love your work, and when I first heard you, I think on Tom Woods, I was like, "Is this guy going to turn out to be anything? He sounds pretty good." And boy, was I! My hopeful side of that turned out to be what happened, and so I'm glad I've got to know you a little bit. We're both Bob Dylan fans, so it's always nice to. I want to talk to you too when I'll email you about this other the How to Resist type project maybe, but I don't know. We can maybe work out a Bob Dylan article or something like that to collaborate on.
I like Bob Dylan after another side of Bob Dylan. Everything before that, I don't really like.
Well, we should have a long discussion because I don't think anybody else is interested. Who's under the age of 47? So.
I like Bob Dylan.
Okay, that's cool.
Just crossed all these generational gaps. But that's another conversation.
Okay. Well, I appreciate everybody. Mike, I know we were talking about our guest coming up next Monday. Do we have anybody nailed down yet? Do you want to, probably better not tease anybody if we don't have anybody nailed down yet, but we were talking some pretty big names along
Not
the
nailed
lines of
down,
Dr.
but I'm sure we'll be able to get Maj Toure on next week. And, there's been a lot of conversation on Twitter about his stance on reparations and all that stuff. We're going to get to the bottom of it here on this show. It's been a long time since we've had Dave Smith on the show, so I want to bring him on, talk to him, and then we'll start booking out for the rest of the next month after that.
Yeah, so we're not exactly sure when those two are going to be on, but I hopefully soon. And if anybody does have a suggestion, hit us up on Twitter, LP Mises Caucus, or Mike is Mises Chair. I'm Libertarian. You see it all there on the screen. So give us a shout out. And thanks. I know you're always very busy, Dr. Rectenwald, and so I'm very glad to have you on. And anytime you need anything from us, if we could possibly at all help, please let us know. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. One last thing. My handle on Twitter is @GreatResetProf. @GreatResetProf.
Yeah, I think I also sent an email out to the list today with a link, and I put it in the description of the show and stuff, because I was talking earlier, when I Google you, I don't get your website, and when I searched for you on Twitter, I thought I had followed you or whatever, and I think maybe you changed your Twitter handle at some point. But
yeah.
When I typed in Michael Rectenwald, you did not come up. So yeah.
Those bastards.
Yeah,
Okay.
I know. We need to get Elon on that. Maybe we could at least get you unshadow ban there. But yeah. I really appreciate it. It's good to see you, Brandi and Mike, and we'll see y'all next week at 7:30 Eastern. Thanks.
Thank you.
Peace.